author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we are talking the politics and the profit of the Venezuela incident. Please remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us today Liberty Nation's economics editor, Mr. Andrew Moran. Now, Andrew, thanks for being here, first off. Now,
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias today as well. Andrew will be the new chief economist of Venezuela under the Trump administration. No, I kid. But yeah, that is what we're talking about today, Andrew. Absolutely. It's the politics and the profits of what's happened in Venezuela. Now, to give me your initial take. So when you heard the news, what were the first things that occurred that Nicolas Maduro had been extricated from Caracas? What were your first thoughts?
307 billion barrels of crude oil and nearly $2 trillion of critical minerals. That's the first thing I thought of when I woke up on Saturday morning to the regime change.
Somehow I knew that was exactly what you're going to answer, which is fortunate because that's also what I want to talk about. So Venezuela is a big oil producing nation. How does this change things? Now, obviously, there's a lot of changes, but practically, how does it change things? So there are still companies in Venezuela that are still drilling. Have they been drilling at capacity? Is it likely that investment's going to flood in to try and really capitalize on what's happening, or?
Yeah, I mean, to your last question, I mean, absolutely. If the United States is going to maintain influence for years to come, and they're opening up production and making it more competent, because for years it's been state owned, and the government has been one producing the oil, but they've been completely incompetent, because in the 1990s they produced about 3.5 million barrels a day. They exported about 3 million of that. But today they're producing about 800,000 barrels per day, and most of that is from Chevron. Chevron, if you remember, in 2019, the Trump administration imposed sweeping sanctions on Venezuela, and then Biden, reimposed those sanctions. But both administrations granted a sanctions exemption for Chevron. So Chevron has been the lone American company there, and they've had a joint partnership with the PDVSA, and that's a state-owned company that operates the oil industry. Now, when it comes to that, I mean, yeah, absolutely. The oil markets right now are not reacting as much because they find short term. There's not going to be a supply shock. There's not going to be any significant disruption. But as time goes on and more supply comes to the markets, then the consensus is that there's going to be downward pressure to oil prices. Right now, they're at 57. Some say it's going to hit below 50 in the coming years.
It was 54 a couple of weeks ago, I think, wasn't it?
WTI the last time at time of us speaking, it said 57. Maybe went up from 54 because of the geopolitical tensions in Ukraine and Russia, and also Saudi Arabia and Yemen.
So there's a very good chance that within a week or two, American companies and other countries are going to be trying to get their investment in there, because 800,000 barrels a day, considering they were using 500,000 barrels a day. As you pointed out, they did 3.5 million. They exported 3 million. There's left them 500,000 barrels. And that was decades ago. And their usage of oil hasn't gone up by more than 300,000 barrels in decades. It's highly unlikely. So my guess is that they're energy-wise, they're just barely scraping by now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's when you read the market notes of what's happening in Venezuela, they attribute to several things. One is that their infrastructure has aged incredibly, that the government didn't make any new investments to their oil jacks or to the production capabilities or refinery, whatever the case. The other one is that some people are blaming the sanctions, that it was U.S. sanctions that prevented Venezuela from taking a full advantage of its oil resources. But I think the other conversation about this when it comes to oil in Venezuela is the refining process. If you look at the type of oil that Venezuela has, it's heavy crude. Now, in the southern United States, the United States has 6 of the world's largest heavy crude refineries in Louisiana and Texas. So when production starts accelerating in Venezuela, the United States is going to benefit incredibly. I mean, everyone talks about oil companies, Chevron, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, whatever the case. It's the refinery companies that are going to benefit far more than oil companies because they have that infrastructure already in place to take full advantage of. They'll have to start building more of it because they already have it. That's the big thing that everyone should be monitoring, not so much the oil companies.
So there's this is definitely going to impact the U.S. economy in several ways, I think, and that's really what our listeners and viewers are most interested in, is how it affects them. So you've just mentioned that, of course, the refining process. Well, I mean, they could send it further up to Canada. I believe there's a refinery in Canada in your neck of the woods, just the one, though, right?
Okay, so with this,
you got to ship that further. Sorry, I'm just teasing it.
If we had this Keystone pipeline, Canada wouldn't have this issue that it's worried about right now.
Yeah.
But so if you want to talk about Canada and in the broader sense, the U.S. economy,
yeah.
Canada now doesn't have any hand in negotiations, trade leverage, nothing whatsoever. In short term, not going to be much issue, but long term, now that the United States has 300 billion barrels in its backyard to take advantage of, it doesn't need to import, 6 million barrels a day now from Canada, and they're not beholden to any Canadian interest. So this year in 2026, there's going to be negotiations for the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada Trade Agreement. Now, every 6 years, as part of the agreement, they review the deal. Now, Canada's leverage was oil, shipping its oil to Canada, to the United States. The United States doesn't do that anymore. So what does Canada have that U.S. would want? Not much steel anymore, because Trump is trying to make American steel great again. Automobiles, he wants to make American automobile great again. Oil, that's out of the way. So Canada brings nothing, maybe timber, lumber, but that's it. So Canada is on the losing end of this Venezuelan operation.
Yeah, I mean, you could always import Tim Hortons coffee, which I know is one of Canada's great.
Brazilian. Tim Hortons is owned by a Brazilian conglomerate.
They might just import it directly. The new Keystone pipeline is the real black gold coming down. So there's a number of ways this is going to impact the U.S. Number one is there'll be money in the U.S. from all the refining process through Louisiana and Texas, right? The 6 biggest going. There'll be more leverage for the USMCA against Canada, because Canada's not going to have the oil leverage anymore. There's going to be American companies investing bigly, as President Trump might say, in Venezuela, and that's going to produce domestically back home as well. Are there any down? Oh, sorry, please. Another one is that.
And one more, low inflation too, lower price inflation. Yes. If you have, because right now, I mean, over the past year, inflation cumulatively has gone up about less than 2%. Compared to the previous, the first year under the previous administration, went up 6%. And one of the reasons that oil prices have just fallen dramatically over the past year, the WTI has fallen about 22%, and gas prices are $2.80 a gallon, national average, and that's skewed by California. So let's say, about 2,000 states are below 275. If that continues, you have less inflation. So everyone talks about the affordability crisis, but things are stabilized, and they will continue to stabilize too, with oil prices as low as they are. Plus natural gas. I mean, there was a natural gas sell-off before you guys started talking. So even that's on the lower end as well. So everything you talked about plus low price inflation.
Inflation continues to baffle me. Not the mechanics of it, but the public reaction to inflation. I mean, it's almost like I don't want to say an inflationary miracle at Christmas time, but it's so under control compared to how it was. And then you look at the polling for Donald Trump, specifically on inflation, and listeners and viewers, you can go and do this. Go to libertynation.com, check out the public square. We have this complete polling operation there that brings in everything from everywhere, and it's beautiful to look at as well. But Donald Trump, his approval on inflation is 26 points underwater. 60% of people disapprove of his position, of what he's done with inflation. And inflation, cumulative over the last year, 2%. Well, under 2%. And it just baffles me that people, there's 60% of people that don't think that, hey, cumulative interest under 2% over a year is a good thing, right?
Well, it's because for a lot of the things that people are still frustrated from the high prices that occurred under the previous administration. And Trump kept saying, I'm going to bring prices down. But a lot of the things are still, prices are still either elevated or they've increased or they have not come down substantially. But I mean, everyone should accept the fact that prices will not return to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, that's just not going to happen. But energy bills, for example, that continues to go up. One of the reasons is because of the heavy demand from the AI data centers. That's gonna strain household budgets just based on the utility bills alone. So I can empathize and sympathize with the American people who are so frustrated by the cost of living. But still, I mean, even home prices have stabilized. Gas prices have come down. Food prices remain elevated. I mean, up in Canada here, I mean, that's our biggest driver of inflation is food. The printing press has been going up, so you're having QE, but borrowing costs, they've come down. So overall, I mean, economic conditions are a lot preferable than they were, and financial conditions a lot preferable than they were a year ago.
We're going to continue the conversation on Venezuela and what that means politically after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andrew back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and we continue our conversation with Liberty Nation's economics editor, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for sticking around, Andrew. So earlier in
Yes, again.
Buenos dias again. Earlier in the show, we're obviously talking Venezuela and the oil and how this might impact the U.S. economy. But let's spread this a little further, Andrew. I know that you're, as is your wont, you're always keen to talk about petrodollars.
Yeah. So you asked me earlier in the segment about what the first thing I thought of when it comes to regime change in Venezuela, and of course oil and the critical minerals. But the other aspect is the petrodollar. I think that's one of the factors behind this regime change operation as well in Venezuela, because you want oil still priced in dollars. And in recent years, Venezuela has been working more with China and selling more of its oil to China and Russia. And one of the big initiatives from China over the last several years has been the de-dollarization, where they want to have more bilateral trade settled in local currencies. For China, it's of course settled in the yuan. Excuse me. So if you're having more trade settled in local currencies as opposed to the U.S. dollar, then that would threaten the dollar hegemony. Now, of course, at the same time, we've seen this over the past decade of the whole de-dollarization concern and the dollar hegemony under threat. So far, you look at, let's say, the payment structure, the U.S. dollar is still the king currency of the world. But still, I mean, obviously, there's still a threat to it if more countries long-term are not settling their transactions in dollars and settling more in rubles or reals, Brazilian reals or Chinese yuan. So I think that was an interesting aspect of this conversation.
Yeah, with what's happening in Venezuela then, there's going to be, because the first people through the door in terms of investment are going to be U.S. companies, and it serves their interest to keep the U.S. dollar as the top dog in the currency markets. So that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if there's a massive centralization of U.S. dollar trading within Venezuela, that's going to kind of spread out through much of South America, isn't it? Because, nations aren't isolated by themselves. And so more and more trades outside of Venezuela in the surrounding countries, which, as you point out, there's been a big push to get them to, especially from China, to get them to use other currencies. And I know they say, well, we do it in local currencies. What's the local currency? It's the Chinese yuan. No matter where you are in the world, it's the Chinese yuan.
Yeah, if you look at Argentina over the past, let's say, 15 years, before Milei arrived to the scene, Argentina did a lot of business with China, and it still does continue. It still does business with China based on soybean exchanges. But one thing that happened in Argentina because of the collapse of the peso, there was greater transactions also occurring in the Chinese yuan. But over the past, let's say, 2 years, there's been a political shift going on across South America. And that is that a lot of countries are adopting conservative policies. You're having a lot of conservative leaders. You saw this in El Salvador. You saw this in Chile. I mean, maybe, who knows, before this regime change, maybe you would have seen it also in Venezuela under the new opposition that would have been backed by the West. But whatever the case, it's turning conservative. So if you're having a more conservative, U.S.-friendly part of the world, then of course, yes, you're going to have more dollar denominated trade. Plus, Trump threatened during the campaign that if anyone abandons the dollar or embraces anti-dollar policies, then he would impose tariffs on those countries that did it. So this regime change operation, excuse me, is really dollar friendly.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is, as discussed, this spreading out all throughout South America. And then, of course, South America trades with other countries, and they don't want to get hit by those tariffs, because if we know one thing for sure, it's that if Donald Trump says he's going to put tariffs on somebody, he's probably going to put tariffs on them. And, at least until he gets blocked by some random courthouse in Connecticut. So there's going to be a big push to get involved in the US dollar. Now, what will that push for more dollar hegemony do for the average American back home? Or is this just a purely an internationalist?
Yeah. Because when it comes to de-dollarization and dollar, in global transactions, it doesn't really affect foreign exchange markets. So, for example, the U.S. dollar index, or even the trade weighted average index, they price the U.S. dollar against, let's say, the Japanese yen or the euro or in your case the British pound. But when it comes to, let's say, the international settlements, that's not going to really impact day-to-day foreign exchange markets, because if you look at some economists call the Mar-a-Lago Accord, it's the idea is that the U.S. administration wants to weaken the U.S. dollar to bolster U.S. exports, and in a way, and you've seen that happen over the past year, the U.S. dollar weakened about 10%. And the trade weighted average index that fell about 7%. And at the same time, you're seeing an increase in U.S. exports. So that's the case. But overall, the whole idea about the war on the U.S. dollar is international supremacy. The joke is that the United States doesn't need to bomb countries; it just needs to impose its will for the U.S. dollar, and that's how strong the U.S. dollar is. It's the world. No matter what you say about the Federal Reserve and its inflation, the U.S. dollar is king for a reason.
Andrew, I can't let you get away without talking about the critical minerals that are set to be exploited by all and sundry, I guess, down in Venezuela.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one thing. Everyone's talking about oil and natural gas, but the critical minerals also a huge part especially for the Trump administration. Silver, bauxites, copper. I mean, Venezuela has massive gold deposits, and all these minerals are going to prove essential for Trumponomics 2.0's next generation economy, robotics, AI, data centers. All these things need critical minerals. And now, Trump had that deal with Ukraine to exploit about half of its critical minerals. Sure, the exact same things that happened with Venezuela, which is, I think, is around $2 trillion worth of critical minerals.
That might be just enough gold in Venezuela to plate the new West Wing ballroom at the White House. Andrew Moran, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Gracias.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andrew back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us Mr. National Security himself, Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, the man who understands everything that's happening between the countries, even when they themselves don't, Mr. Dave Patterson. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure to be with you.
So there's not much happening geopolitically recently, is there, Dave? It's pretty much every country for themselves, except down south further than Mexico way, I guess, right? With Venezuela and El Presidente, or should we even call him that now? Nicolas Maduro. So I think the world was stunned when Trump posted out, "We've got Maduro." And his wife, of course. And there's been such a major division on what people think about that, whether it's in terms of morality, legality, constitutionality. But first, I want to kind of delve into your area of expertise here. Now, we did get some details from General Kane, from Marco Rubio, and of course from President Trump on how this was carried out. But it seems to me that the team that actually went in and extracted Nicolas Maduro must have been preparing this for weeks or months in advance, right?
Yeah, well, I think they said that it's been months in the making, and that you had the Delta Force that
Yes.
supported the Department of Justice.
So Chuck Norris, along with
Right. And then for air assets, I believe they had the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment that flew helicopters, and they had drones. In fact, they had from what I understand from the reporting, they had I believe it's an MQ-170, which is a stealth drone.
yes.
And that was up overhead, landed in Puerto Rico. And so it was pretty much a joint operation. I mean, everybody got a piece of it.
And I guess what surprises most people is in the leaky ship that is Washington, D.C., is nobody knew this was happening. How is that even possible in this day and age? I mean, I guess the jaded answer is it's because he didn't tell Congress.
Exactly.
And,
right.
and is that the answer? Is it?
No, that's precisely correct. And to be pretty accurate, if you want to have your operation somewhat confidential, you nobody tells Congress first. There have been occasions, I think, when George H.W. Bush, but he talked to selective people on the Intel Committee that he could trust, and he didn't tell the Intel Committee.
Sure.
But generally, if it's something that's going to be fairly dramatic and large, you'll tell the speaker, and not the minority leader.
Right.
And
so a gang of four rather than a gang of eight.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, but in all fairness, I mean, there are trusted agents over there that
Sure.
in the Congress that you can share with. I think it's best and a good practice to tell people after it happened.
Mm. Well, it's for operational security, I can see that. Now, of course, there is some pushback that from congressional members that they weren't briefed in advance, and that, I mean, well, actually, I think that kind of brings us on to quite an important point. Is now, Dave, you've worked alongside international agencies, supranational organizations during your career, and so you'd understand this probably better than most. But it seems to me that there is the pushback against Donald Trump here is based on one of two things. Either A, it was a use of force that is against the UN Charter. It's a use of force. So for any use of force against a sovereign nation, he should have had a go-ahead from the UN. But on the I know, because that's going to work out. I understand the ridiculousness of it, but the other one is that he was, and he did stress this initially, and of course Marco Rubio was very much on point about it being this. It was a law enforcement operation, which had direct government military involvement alongside law enforcement. And there's going to be legal challenges. There's going to be votes to try and stop any further action in, or maybe that, but at time of recording, that may have already happened, which is very much to be unlikely, because Donald Trump, unless they get a 2/3 majority, Donald Trump can veto it. But there's so it's either use of force or it was a law enforcement operation. Now, there's actually good precedents, I think, legally for a law enforcement operation, because a similar thing happened with Manuel Noriega, didn't
That's
it?
right. And there are actually quite a few similarities between the Noriega extraction and getting Maduro. First, you had in Panama, Noriega began to pick up and detain American citizens. Maduro began to pick up and detain American citizens. The drugs, the similarity, very obvious. And but Noriega became a threat to Americans in Panama.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, that was the same thing that was happening to in Venezuela, and so they're I think in those two areas they're just it is similar. And of course, he went in, and it was a little bit more dramatic with Noriega. I mean, that took a little bit more time and effort, and a larger show of force, actually.
Yeah. But people will also be arguing that Donald Trump illegally did a use of force exercise. And I wonder, do you think that the Trump administration will have trouble defending against those charges?
No, I don't think so. I think that they can make the case that it was a law enforcement action supported by necessary military capability and from everything I've learned, they did quite a good job of limiting collateral damage, and so I think they have a good case. I also think that in a very cynical way, they don't care. They got what they wanted. Yeah. But there's also this element to it that they told they told Maduro and offered him an off ramp, not once but twice. And I think the last one was just a few weeks ago. But on November 21st, they said, "Hey, look, we want you out of there, and this is what we'll do. No harm, no foul. Just pick your bags up. We'll give you safe passage, but we want you out." And he turned their offer down, and so you get what you get.
Yeah, so you've got the I've found this quite amusing. Is you've got the same people who were involved in the No Kings protests in 2025, and now they're saying, "Hey, Donald Trump can't remove this guy." Now, this guy, I think pretty much everybody. Maybe there's a couple of more pariah states that say, no, the elections there are legitimate and he's the legitimate ruler. But the vast majority of stable nations say, he's an illegitimate ruler. He cheated in the election or didn't even bother cheating in the election, just held on to power. Because I guess a president is only a president if he is in power according to that nation's rules, laws, and constitution. And that doesn't seem to be the case for Maduro, does it?
Well, I mean, in the fact that he basically broke all the laws and traditions and of his own country. I mean, I think that his most egregious crime was the drugs. I think that. And it's going to be kind of an interesting, the day after how this is going to sort out, and because I think that there's so much international criminal and terrorist activity going on in Venezuela that even just taking Maduro out is not going to be the solution, the total solution.
Well, we're going to discuss what happens next after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. So, Dave, thanks for sticking around. Earlier in the show, we discussed what happened with Nicolas Maduro, president of Venezuela, once removed, if that works. But I'd like to talk about what's going to happen in Venezuela and in America and Washington, D.C. in particular for going forward, because Donald Trump discussed quite widely that the people on the podium with him when he made the announcement last week were essentially going to be running Venezuela until such time as a functioning government could be put in place. So there's a lot of accusations rightly or wrongly, of nation building here. What's your take?
Well, I think that the Trump administration is going to try to avoid nation building. I mean, as best as they can, and I think that they're more than happy to let those elements of the government that can and should be, keeping the lights on, keeping the water running, and the trash picked up. And I think though that the real problem that they're going to have is the resistance from. You've got Hezbollah, setting up camp in Marguerite Island, and you have the drug cartel run by the military, and so you've got a lot of things, and you got Iran and Russia and China and Cuba that has 15 to 20,000 Cubans in Venezuela, with 500 Cubans estimated to be training the army and the armed forces. So there are a lot of sticky wickets here.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a clearinghouse for it's become a clearinghouse for the worst of the worst on the international stage. As you say, that like Iran's got involvement there, Hezbollah's in there, there's Cuban. I'm doing the air quotes, revolutionaries in there training Venezuelan soldiers. What for? It's almost certainly city-based guerrilla warfare, and whether that's going to be just on the streets of Venezuela, that remains to be seen. So this isn't a one and done shot, really, for the Trump administration, is it? Because there's all these tentacles, and as you say, the military are actually controlling, or at least benefiting substantially from the drug trade. How just taking one head off the hydra here doesn't really work, does it?
No, because it's a good and apt generalization. Yeah, it is a hydra. I mean, you cut one head off, two more grow, and so it's going to take a real clever and sophisticated effort, I think, to bring Venezuela back to its former self. Now, there's the advantage here is that Venezuela has a history and a legacy of being a democratic country, and so they know how to do it. And for the last couple of decades, they've had a problem. But I think that unlike others, unlike Afghanistan or Iraq, which had no history of democracy or that kind of government, Venezuela does, and I think that the United States is going to be relying on that legacy quite a bit.
Okay, and is there much that, let's call it critics of this, national critics of Trump's move, for example, Russia, Iran, China, is there much they can do to intervene in whatever happens there in Venezuela?
I think that for the most part they'll be on the outside yelling epithets. I think there's not very much, because one of the things that has become very clear, and that is when Donald Trump says he's going to do something, he does it. I mean, he doesn't chat about it and do studies and have focus groups.
This focus group diplomacy,
and I think that if the world hadn't taken note of this before, I mean, they certainly have to now. And I think it's establishing what has become known as the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine.
Sure, yeah, he calls it the Donroe Doctrine. Right?
Yeah, the Donroe Doctrine. I mean, you're not going to mess around in the Western Hemisphere and put the United States' interests at risk. You're just not going to do that, and we're not going to allow it.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, isn't it? Because the Monroe Doctrine, 1823, so it's over 200 years old. Is it? Now, that was designed to keep European powers from interfering in what's happening. So it's spread a little further south, and it's become more of as you say, a Western Hemisphere approach. And I think the
primarily Spain, right?
Yeah, the keen-eyed and eared political followers will have noticed that for the first time, at least in my lifetime, that there's very much a talk about Western Hemisphere is our domain, right? This impacts us. That's you. Western Hemisphere is our domain, and there's got to be some. It's not necessarily cooperation, but there's got to at least be what's the right way of saying this? No backstabbing and no snide attempts to try and undermine U.S. authority, especially within the United States. Now, does this mean that? I mean, would you say that the Venezuela extraction of Maduro fits within the Monroe Doctrine?
Oh, I think so. I think that that in its loosest interpretation, I think that it does, and in as much as all of these,
not geographically necessarily,
but all of these other countries that have been meddling in, and particularly China, in Central and South America. I mean, their tentacles have become really very strong and many, and it's like I say, it's going to be fascinating to see how a new Venezuelan government, with the help of Donald Trump, will deal with these, particularly Hezbollah. Hezbollah concerns me because they've been there in South America. They've been there for about 30 years and doing nothing but mischief. And I mean, they're a terrorist organization, for heaven's sakes. We can't have that, in so close to the United States with
their own island, by the way. That's
what they're on, basically. Yeah, exactly. Their own island, a training ground for terrorism, and I'm surprised we didn't have a kind of an errant bomb takeouts of Hezbollah just for good measure.
Yeah. Oops. We just one of our missiles went astray.
And for the most part, from just on that point, from what I can gather, is that the suppression of enemy air defense, SEAD operation, was very, very successful.
Yeah.
Nothing could come up.
Yeah, it really does show the capabilities of the United States when it's willing to use them, whether that's right or wrong. But the capabilities are, I think, unquestionably top tier in the world. So final question for you, Dave. In light of what's happened with Nicolas Maduro, do you think that Kim Jong-un is sweating right now more than usual?
I don't think so. I mean, he might be. I mean, all dictators have the problem of paranoia, but because I mean, there's no reason to. I mean, really. I mean, okay, you're a nuclear nation now, and Trump recognized him. Of course, he's a nuclear nation. He's got nuclear weapons. I mean,
it's definitionally correct, even if not politically, as the.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, you look at the kind of protection that would be really tough in North Korea.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Dear Leader Kim Jong-un, you're safe for a little while. Dave Patterson, thanks ever so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Happy to be with you.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests, Andrew Moran and Dave Patterson. And of course, thank you, the listeners, for taking the time to join us. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation. This presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.